In this chapter, we'll take a look at the biosocial development that occurs in late adulthood. An important thing to keep in mind during this phase of development is one might experience what's referred to as ageism. And ageism is defined as prejudice in which people are categorized and judged solely on the basis of their chronological age. Now, this can have a variety of effects on those who experience this type of ism, and we'll take a look at some of these on following slides. An important thing to keep in mind is every kind of ism is destructive, but ageism may be especially destructive. And they list a few reasons why that may be the case. I recommend you pause the slide and read these to gain further insight. And I made some notes here. These are just my notes I inserted in here. So an important thing is, a lot of stereotypes that we tend to use just automatically, that's part of our, society and that thing, may appear to be kind of harmless or benevolent and complimentary, things like young lady or something like that. But actually, these can have insidious effects. They can actually erode an older person's feeling of competence. And ageism, that actually can help kind of like foster anxiety, morbidity, and even mortality. And so please pause this video and read these, gain further insight, and we'll move on. So they're saying the potential consequences when ageism becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, and that can just manifest in more dependency on others, giving up when young adult norms are not met, and feeling feeble, and consequently avoiding social interaction and caring for oneself. And I added a note down here at the bottom in red, and I just stated that, attitudes toward aging may be one reason that longevity actually varies markedly depending on where a person lives. So that's can be a cultural thing as well as a geographical type thing. So please keep that in mind. Now here's a chart. I'm not going to go through this, but you may be interested if you pause the video and look at this in depth. You may gain some insight that you may find interesting. So during a late adulthood, things like sleep, the circadian rhythms, those can actually diminish as one ages. And so they mention here, that many older people, they may wake before dawn and may be sleepy during the day. And another thing too is regard to exercise. On average, only about 35% of those over the age of 65 will actually meet recommended guidelines for aerobic exercise and strength increasing type exercise. And why would that be? And so they mention a few things here, that older adults, might not exercise because, they're afraid that they may injure themselves, cause damage to their bodies, or they may even experience maybe lack of social support. And another thing, is that most team sports and other activities, they may be designed for individuals who belong to a much younger generation. Now, a term that's known as elder speak, that is kind of a condescending way of speaking to older adults. And it kind of sounds kind of like baby talk, with short, simple sentences, exaggerated emphasis, repetition, and speaking at a slower rate and a higher pitch than one would normally use. And unfortunately, those who, belong to older generations, whatever, they're aware of that. And so that is a way that it's almost a form of ageism, and that can actually, affect adversely individuals who experience that. Okay, so within older adulthood, there might be what's called young old and old and oldest old. And please pause the video and look at this a little more in depth. Okay, moving on. So out of this slide, the only important thing is to this talks about microsystem compensation, and I'm not too concerned about that term so much as just knowing though that in older adulthood, most people remain sexually active through that phase, and although it may be less frequent, and but those in marriage and couples and things like that, they, even though that may be the case, they actually may actually improve the relationship, develop a lot more intimacy and things like that, not just based upon sex. Now, in regard to driving, just some things to keep in mind, that those who are in older adulthood may, drive more slowly, might not drive at night or when there's bad weather, and may actually give up driving completely. And so just keep that in mind. Remember, these are broad generalizations. They don't apply to every individual. Now, the senses, in regard to the senses, every sense becomes a little slower and less sharp with each passing decade. So as we age, our senses become a little less sharp and a little slower, and that actually occurs for all senses. Touch, pain, taste, smell, sight, hearing, that kind of thing. So just keep that in mind. Now, in regard to one sense that can diminish during aging is visual sense. And so visual problems are really common as one ages. Things like brighter lights and bifocals are needed, or different types of glasses depending on what one does. For instance, reading as compared to just general working around the house or something like that. And things like cataracts, glaucoma, macular degeneration can happen, but it can also be avoided, if diagnosed early. One of the other senses that maybe experience some effect will be auditory sense, which is just hearing. And so they just have some statistics here, in the United States, maybe 39% of people over the age of 65 have some hearing difficulty, and 8% might actually be deaf. And rates are higher amongst men than they are those of women. And so we're going to move on here. And so all systems together in regard to that. So in primary aging, that refers to universal and irreversible physical changes that occur to basically all living creatures as they grow older. And those can be, for instance, the heart pumps more slowly, vascular network is less flexible, lungs and kidneys may function less effectively, digestion slows, healing takes longer from an illness and accident. And so those are some examples of things that one may have experienced in older adulthood. Now, in secondary aging, that refers to specific physical illnesses or conditions that become more common with aging, but result from poor health habits, genetic vulnerability, and other influences that may vary from person to person. Now, in regard to illness, things like the flu, can be a little more affect an individual a little more strongly and differently in older adulthood. And what's important in this slide right here is just the fact right here that definitely annual immunization is recommended for those over ages of 65. And it's because their other infirmities make flu sometimes fatal. So it can have a much stronger effect on older individuals. Now, hypertension may also increase with aging. Now, that just means the high blood pressure rises. Now, definitely things like remaining physically active and well can actually decrease the occurrence of morbidity. Now, definitely as one ages, one may experience an increased chance of falling, and that is due to balance issues or injury in the legs or the back or something like that. So definitely with age, what's important on this slide right here is with age, one's bones become more porous, therefore losing calcium and strength, and that can lead to osteoporosis. And that's why falling can especially be very dangerous for somebody of advanced age. Now, theories of aging, so what are some of the theories about what happens to one as one ages? And so just some common phrases like wear and tear, that's the process by which the human body just wears out due to the passage of time and exposure to stresses. Now, down here, they mentioned that calorie restriction actually can increase age by by actually reducing the amount of stress on the body. Now, genetic clock, that just refers to the mechanism in our DNA cells, and they regulate the aging process by triggering hormonal changes and controlling cellular reproduction and repair. So definitely as one ages, actually one's telomeres, that is the end of the chromosome. So in this photo right here, this is a young person's chromosomes. And you see right here, these white things on the end right there. Those are the telomeres. And those actually become shorter as one ages. I put this slide in here. I thought this was very interesting. And so definitely things like for centenarians, those who live up to 100 years old or beyond, what they've determined certain factors that actually help them achieve that. And those were things like good diet, staying active at work or, productive work, family and community, strong social connection and networking, and last but not least, exercise and relaxation. And so this gentleman right here, he's been running for 103 years old, 3 years actually. He's been running for that long, and he can actually run, like 100 meters within 30 seconds. So he's in great shape for someone who's supposedly of quote unquote advanced age. So just some things to keep in mind there. So in regard to the term maximum life expectancy, that's the oldest possible age to which members of a species can live under ideal circumstances. And so they say, for humans, that age is approximately 122 years. Now, very rarely does a human actually live to 122 years old. And so that's just something to keep in mind. But that is the actual maximum life expectancy for humans. Now, the average life expectancy, that is actually each species seems to have a genetic timetable for declination and death. And so, although the average lifespan has clearly increased, it is disputed whether the maximum can increase as well. And so, here's something that's important. So, there are dramatic variations in these between nations. So, definitely culture and geographic location, everything, those can actually be influential factors in life expectancy. And so that concludes our discussion. Please complete your study guides for this chapter, as well as participate in our discussion forums for this chapter.